Good evening. It's great to be with you this afternoon as we talk about demand culture, how beliefs shape our behavior. So it's great to be with you this evening and happy to have my co-facilitator and co-founder of A Call to Men, Ted Bunch. Ted, you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening, everyone. Ted Bunch. I'm joining you from New York. Happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this time with you. I want to thank Pam and also the Demand Reduction Task Force for their vision and leadership in this opportunity.
Thanks, Ted. And one of the things you talked about demand task force, let's, really define demand. And when we think about our conversation tonight, when we look at demand, we think about a consumer's desire to buy goods and services without any hesitation and pay the price for it. And so that's our definition that we're going to work with tonight as we get into this conversation. But also when we think about demand too, Ted reminds me as our CEO and your partner, Tony, our other co-founder, at a conference one time, he said women could have ended the violence, they would have done so already. So we're going to end the violence. It's going to take us having conversation, working with men. How do we hold each other accountable? How we work alongside with women to reduce the violence. So when we think about demand, we think about the numbers. These numbers are staggering. When we think about 80% of men never purchase sex, that's 108 million men. We think about 20% of men have purchased sex, so that's 27 million. So that's a lot of men who purchase sex. But when we look at it, who purchase annually, 6%, when we think about 8.1 million. So when we look at it from a capitalist standpoint, that's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And when we think about purchasing sex, and we just watched the video, and this is an updated number. When we think about the average age of a girl that's sex trafficked, that's 14 years old. When we think about that, so Ted, what are some of the numbers that we're working with now? With some of our work.
So in our work, there's a couple of things. One is, and the demand reduction video spoke to this, that demand is what's fueling the crime. That is the fuel that moves this engine around commercial sexual exploitation and human trafficking as well. And as we go through this conversation, Rickie alluded to it with the numbers. 80% of men don't purchase, aren't involved in sex trafficking or purchase sex. So that's an overwhelming majority. And that, like domestic violence and sexual assault, all of those things are generally more men are doing that than women. Like most of that violence is perpetrated by men, but most men aren't violent or most men don't purchase sex, but we're silent about those that do. And that's as much of the problem as the purchasing and as the violence is. So we want to speak to the silence. That's what the work of A Call to Men is, going upstream to speak to the silence because that is the majority of men. So as we go through this conversation, Rickie and I are going to be talking about manhood and masculinity and how we raise our boys. And we would like for you to look at this as not an indictment on manhood, but an invitation to men. This is not about calling men out, it's about calling men in.
Thanks, Ted. Also, when we think about our live respect surveys, talk a little bit about that as well.
So, Live Respect is our curriculum that we've written with Scholastic for middle school and high schools. And it's Live Respect, life skills and well-being for boys and young men. And it's 12 lessons focused on healthy masculinity, authenticity, gender fairness, respect and value for all, also around anti-bullying. So, and also anti-gun violence, right? So it's anti-gun violence curriculum as well. So this curriculum is 12 lessons. It's throughout the country and it's also available to any of you all. And you can certainly, we'll leave information at the end if you want to learn more about the Live Respect curriculum. But this statistic in particular is a really interesting one because when we wrote the curriculum, we surveyed boys from all around the country, boys who I don't see you all, but they look just like the boys in your community and the boys in my community. Very diverse group of boys. And we asked all of them, these were high school boys in particular, a lot of questions around the curriculum so we could gather their input so we knew what we needed to write about. What did we need to address that these young boys are facing? And one of the things, and also what young girls are facing. And one of the things that we asked the boys, again, good boys in your community and in my community, we asked them, can you define consent? And only 19% of boys could define consent. 8 out of 10 could not. Well, that explains a lot. That explains sexual assault in the military. It explains sexual assault on college campuses. It explains why girls and women between the ages of 16 and 24 in our country are at the highest risk for being sexually assaulted. Our boys think no means try harder. And we're going to peel back some of the layers about why that is, why they believe that, and what they're being taught, even through their socialization, because we're all swimming in the same water. Remember, this is not an indictment, it's an invitation. And now, so after the curriculum, and only one lesson was on consent. After the curriculum, that number went, we did a pre-test, which is in the beginning when there was only 19%, and then a post-test. At the end of the curriculum, that number went from 19 to 75% of those boys could define consent, and only one lesson was on consent. So if they're given the information, they know how to behave. But right now, as men, we don't pass down that information to our boys. We don't pass down to value women and girls, to respect their boundaries. It's actually the opposite. What we do is what those boys, the reason why only 8 out of 10, reason why 8 out of 10 boys did not know what consent is, because they're taught through their socialization that no means try harder or get her drunk or put a Molly in her drink, something where it's all about the conquest. So at the end of the curriculum, that number went to 75. So that's a lot of prevention that occurred here, from 19 to 75%. Not only about victims who were not victimized, but also about boys whose lives didn't get derailed because they did something inappropriate that they didn't know was wrong to do, because we've never had the conversation with them about that. So the curriculum really is around life skills and well-being for boys and young men. We also asked another statistic, which is this first one: 41% believe of young men, again in your community, boys and young men, believe that once someone starts to engage in sexual activity, that their partner, and they were really, it was really more of heteronormative relationship. We're talking about boys as it relates to girls. But once they start, if a girl says, yes, I want to have sex, and then she decides in the middle of sex to say that she doesn't want to, she wants to stop, 41% of our boys, good boys now, yours and mine, believe that she can't change her mind. That once she says yes, that's good for her as long as he wants it to be. So we have a lot of work to do around educating our boys. And again, it's not their fault. They're simply they're just repeating what's been taught to them, passed down from one generation to the next. So our work at A Call to Men and the Live Respect curriculum is to interrupt those things, keep the wonderful things that are about manhood, but then challenge those things that are harmful to women, girls, the LGBTQ, transgender, nonconforming community, but also to men and boys.
Chad, just listening to you, when what I hear you saying is that that belief system, when we think about how belief shapes behavior, that begin at an early age. When we think about, I think about these three boys here in this picture here who are later to become men. And oftentimes, as men, we're permission seekers. When I look at this picture, Ted, I've been each of these three boys. When I look at that boy in the middle, this is a young man who's confident. I don't know where he learned it, probably learned from a big brother or uncle or cousin, or maybe another boy at school, but he's confident, in what he's doing there. But the kid to the right, he's got his muscles up. I don't know how this conversation started, but hey, let me see your muscles. But the kid to the right, he's doing a really, really good job, but he's watching him. He's paying attention to him. So how he's learning is watching someone else. But the kid to my left, this kid, he's doing it. He's just going through the motions. He want to be anywhere else but there, but he's
Mhm.
just going along to get along. So when I think about that is that how often do we do things that we really don't want to do, but in order to be in a box, in order to be accepted, we do those things. So these boys, their belief systems, begin to be shaped at a very, very early age. And and like I said earlier, is that these little boys are not going to be boys always. They're going to become men, and they're going to be part of those stats that you were sharing earlier. What do you think about that, Ted?
I totally agree. And that's the way that's what we're teaching our boys. And I'm going to ask Rickie, I just wanted to mention to folks who are listening and watching rather, if they have thoughts, they could put them in the chat. We're not going to be able to respond to anything, everything, but feel free to share what's going on with you as you're hearing these things, especially agreement. It would really be helpful. Yeah, I like what you said about the young man, well, the boy who's on the far left as we're looking at it. He's reluctant. He does not want to be there. But that's what that pressure, that peer pressure says, I got to stay here and I got to still act like it. As reluctant as he is, he's still got to go along with these other two. So one of the things that is really important, again, back to this live respect curriculum that we have for youth, is it teaches leadership. It teaches them to be able to have language, what to say, how to say it in their situations where they are getting pressure to do things that are not appropriate, or something they're not comfortable with, or not something that's not authentic to them. And even when we talk, as we move into more around demand, a lot of this same kind of dynamic happens with our young men as it relates to demand, watching porn, all of those kind of things.
So we teach them at an early age, what manhood is all about. But a call to men, we have this definition of manhood, as we talk about distancing. You want to talk about that, some?
Yeah, so we're really taught, and again, this is men in general. We're all swimming in the same water, right? And it's not that there's good men or bad men. It's just this is our socialization. And we believe that men are operating, even those who do things that have beliefs that we feel might be harmful, they believe that because they believe it. They believe they're right. So we want to be able to educate them and teach them, the problems or challenges with it. So there's unhealthy behaviors that are created from this, and it's really this man box that we're taught to live in. And some of the ways that why we're silent about the violence that happens to women and girls outside of the women and girls in our life. Because if there's a women and girls in our life, it's if our wife, our mother, our girlfriend, our daughter, we're leaning in, we're taking a lot of responsibility in that. But if she's not, it's almost as if that's somebody else's problem. And if she doesn't have a man who's in her life that can do anything about it, that's not on me. And so, you know what, Ricky, it makes me want to share a story about my daughter. When I think about distancing, it makes me want to share a story about my daughter. And I'm going to ask if there's any, well, if people in the chat if anybody wants to add, if they have children in the chat. I'm specifically thinking about daughters, and I'm talking specifically to men about daughters. So if there's men on the line, or even the women, or whoever's on the line, who may identify in any kind of way, um, the importance of men speaking out around these things, why it's important that we don't distance ourselves from the experience of women and girls. So my daughter went to college in Virginia at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, UVA. Now, I'm going to ask you all to think about if there's a young woman in your community who goes away to college. Imagine I'm in New York. If I have to get to my daughter, it's going to take me about 5 hours, 6 hours driving to get to her, but I'm going to get to her. And Maya is her name. She asked me to come down her last year at UVA, and she asked me to come down to help her pick out an apartment with two other young women. She wanted to live off campus, to leave the dorms and live off campus at UVA. And so I went down, looked at a place. Her mom and I went down, looked at the place. We chose a place, and I'm driving back. And Maya called me and said, Dad, when you bring my things down, will you bring me a pair of your old shoes or boots? So, why would she want a pair of my old shoes or boots? Well, to put them outside the door. Why does she want to put them outside the door? Because she feels like there needs to be a representation of a man as a deterrent for violence not to occur to her, for her to feel safer, for her to feel more secure. Now, of course, those boots aren't going to do anything for her, but what what it does do is give her a sense of security. Now, I'm going to ask again for those who are watching, while we know those boots aren't going to do anything for her, and of course I got her the boots, right, to put outside the door because I want her to be safe. But I want you to think about if there's a young girl in your community, in your family, who's say 10 years, and she goes, by the time she gets to be 18 and goes away to college or leaves home and gets her own apartment, wouldn't it be great that she doesn't have to put shoes outside of her door? Like, how do we get there? that means that men have to get involved. So we can't distance ourselves from the experiences of women and girls out in general, not just the women and girls in our life. We have to take more investment in all women and girls, and that means speaking to men. So one of the things that we're taught as men in distancing ourselves from the experiences of women and girls is the things that you'll see here, because many of these things are things that we've been taught that women and girls do. Vulnerability. Women and girls can be vulnerable. If when men are vulnerable, it's seen as weakness, right? So men don't want to be vulnerable. Don't be like a girl, right? Those are things we're taught all the time. For example, I'm in North Carolina throwing a football with a 6-year-old boy, and I'm throwing him that football, and it's me, or maybe it's his coach, or his big brother, or his uncle, or some man in his life teaching him how to throw that football, and he's throwing it, and that man says to him, "Son, you have to throw harder than that. You throw like a..." Now, everybody can answer that. That's our socialization. Now, we know that answer would be girls. Doesn't mean you believe it or it's true, because girls throw just fine. But that's what the little boy is being told. So, what does that little boy learn after he's 6 years old? Does he learn after that interaction with that man in his life who he's trying to please? Does he learn that girls are equal to him or less than him? Well, less than. And so we're taught all the time, we're teaching our boys, don't be like a girl in many different ways. That's just one example. But we do this all day long. So that's where that 6-year-old boy starts to see that, I don't want to be like a girl, because then it starts shaming girls too. So all of those things, we're told that we're not supposed to, as you can pick out, if anyone wants to add in the chat also, anything that they grab in here, right, about the distancing, right, that we're not supposed to show emotions, except what emotion is allowed to be shared? Anger. But anger is really a secondary emotion. Most of the time, we're experiencing disappointment, pain, hurt. There's something else going on that we're reacting to, and but we can't share that I'm hurt, I'm sad, I'm lonely, she left me, my heart is broken. Because when we do that, other men laugh at us, because again, that's not something a man is supposed to do. Even our boys, we tell them to stop crying at a very early age, and they don't know that not crying, well, they think that not crying also means not feeling, because that's what we're teaching them. So those are the kind of things when we talk about distancing, those are the kind of things. But why don't you give some examples also, Ricky? I know you have a lot to say here.
Yeah, Ted, one of the big things is that when I hear you talking about, little boys as we begin to shut down their emotions at a very early age, we're teaching them not to feel it. So all of this is shaping their belief system, and then those things that you believe, those become actions later on. And so this is why this conversation is so important. But also with that, Ted, too, that, it's leading to what we call that man box, with that whole set of rules about be this, don't be that. And I think you said earlier about, hey, if I'm vulnerable, if I'm saying that, hey, you hurt my feelings, then other men, I'm afraid other men are gonna laugh at me. And so we have this whole set of rules around the man box, that always have to be tough, always have to be strong. But when I think about being tough and I think about strong, I think we needed to develop uh, another definition for strong, because too
Mhm.
often we think about strong as muscles. But when I think about strength, I think about one of the strongest people that I've ever experienced was my mom.
Hmm.
And when I normally have this conversation with most men, we probably can name more strong women in our lives than we can men. And so we have to really, really, get another definition of strength when it comes around to manhood. Um, and I think something else too is that oftentimes when you talked about not showing emotions, the emotion that we're allowed to show, that you said was anger, we're able to show aggression. But why can't I say, hey, Ted, what you said, hurt my feelings? Can we have a conversation around that? Why can't I be honest about what's really, really, really going on with that for me? And so those old man box rules that really kind of keep us locked in a very, very dangerous place. Talk more about that, Ted.
Well, you said a lot, and I just want to share that. Folks might be like, "Well, I tuned in to talk about demand, to learn more about demand. What is this all about that we're talking about now? The socialization of men." Well, it's all connected, because men have certain beliefs, and we are passing those beliefs down to our boys, and we reinforce those beliefs with each other. Again, it's in our socialization, right? Not in our DNA. It's in our socialization. It's something we're taught. It's not inherent in us. That's why you'll never hear us at a call to man put the word toxic with masculinity, because masculinity is not toxic. There's behaviors that we consider, sure, toxic behaviors, but masculinity is not one of them. So when we peel back the layers of this onion of this male socialization, we're talking about rigid notions of manhood, really, right? Because there's so many wonderful things about being a man, and I know you, Ricky, you love being a man and a father. I love being a man and a father. So this is in no way attacking that, but we do have to examine our beliefs. And that's why demand exists, because we're taught that women and girls have less value than men and boys, that women on some level are objects for men, and also property of men. So I want to talk just a little bit about this, and then if I could go there, Ricky, because you talked about some things that you talked about your mom and the strength that she has. And when we talk to adult men, men who are in college or military age, or even high school boys, and we ask them, if you take away the physical ability of how much somebody can lift, their bench press, right? That, yeah, most men are going to be able to lift more. The average man is going to be able to lift more weight than the average woman. That's just the way that it is. But that doesn't mean that men are better than women. But if we take that strength, that aspect of strength away, the physical capability of how much you can lift, for example, and we ask men, young men, and boys, do you know more strong women or strong men? If you're looking at all the other characteristics of strength, their answer is what your answer was, Ricky, is that women, right? Because they've had to be actually living in a world, living in a patriarchal, male-dominated society. They've actually had to be, right? Because of the realities that they're facing. And also, you talked about aggression. Now, I'm in New York, so we have the Giants here, we have the Jets here. I know y'all got the Panthers, right? So if you're a football fan, or if you're a basketball fan with the Charlotte Hornets, for example, you want them to be aggressive. It's a good thing, right? Like, you wish they were more aggressive. You want them to dominate. You want them to impose their will, right? So there's places for it, but not in our personal life, and be able to ask for help. Just like you said, why can't I say you hurt my feelings, right? Why can't I say I'm not feeling 100% today? I'm feeling a little bit I'm feeling weak. I'm feeling vulnerable, right? If there's a light that comes on in our car where it says your passenger side rear tire indicator says that your temper the air pressure is low, you don't keep driving around on that. You go see, make sure, let me put some air in here and make sure it's no big problem. Make sure that light goes off. Well, we have those lights that go on with us all the time in our life, and we have to be able to get those checked out as well, because what winds up happening is we wind up acting out on these things. So when we look at this man box here that you brought up, Ricky, we look at all of these things: be tough, be strong, no weakness, courageous, aggression, protector. There's many good things in there. Protector, I want to be a protector. I want to protect my family, but women protect their families too. Gay, lesbian, trans folks protect their families too. So it's not something that just men do. Being, I, so you all can see the man box kind of characteristics there on the left of your screen, in that lighter blue box. And on the right side, you'll see the rules that keep those things in place, right? So I don't ask for help. Always be in control. Don't act like a woman, whatever that means. Don't be too caring, and don't be too kind, because kindness can be seen as, y'all know the answer to that, right? Don't show emotions except for anger, right? Act like a man, whatever that is. So I would like to talk about the less value property objectification, but I'm going to turn it back over to you, Ricky, because maybe you want to dive into that too. Okay, I'm sorry. You're right here.
Oh, Ted, really what, because you talk about those man box rules, and I think you said earlier is that when we all know, the man box rules, whether we operate in it or not, but when we operate outside of that man box, those are some of the things that go along with it. All right. And you talked about anything being associated with a woman or showing emotions. Then how we push men, how we talk, and talk about that belief system, how we push men back into that box and say, hey, you need to man up. This is what we call that collective socialization of manhood or being sensitive. All those things are how we push back in that man box. And so, Ted, as we think about trafficking, talking about belief system, you know, one of the things that we think about the box is that it's hurting women and girls, but it's also hurting us as men.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And there's some comments in the chat there also. Really appreciate people putting their voice in the chat. That they're definitely in agreement with what they're saying. That's their experience as well.
Yeah.
Okay, Rickie.
And yeah. And so outside, so when we think about this whole box, being outside of the box, this box is holding us as men hostage as well. Because there's some things I want to go back to the picture of those three little boys. That little kid on the left, he really didn't want to be there, but he was just really going along to get along. But how do we get to the place when we talk about our belief system, how we shape our behaviors? How do we move to the place where we're having conversation with these boys, where we teach them at an early age that as you said earlier, there's some beautiful things about being a man,
I
but
love it.
those things that's unhealthy, how do we challenge those things that are, that we're afraid to step out of, that we've been held hostage by this box? How do we move to the place where we're doing something different? How do we move to that place?
Rickie, can you talk about that a little bit, just as far as, when I think about um, and I'm not sure if we have it later on. If we do, we can wait. But just really around the impact, how it's not working for men either, that we're dying about 5 to 6 years earlier than women.
It's when we think about, and appreciate that, Ted, is that when we think about, especially showing emotions, when we said earlier, when we tell little boys, and it's normally about 3, 4, we normally say 5 years old when we tell little boys that big boys don't cry. And so we really shutting down their emotions at a very early age. And so men, and that's one of the things you linked to earlier, that we don't ask for help. So oftentimes we're dealing with things, we're keeping things locked up inside. And how that hurts us as men, because Ted, if I confide in you something, I'm afraid you're going to look at me as weak. If I confide in with you something, then that I don't have it going, that I don't have everything together. And oftentimes, how that show up as men is that, within our health, because how does it impact our mental health when we can't ask for help? When we think about that, we are actually completing suicide as men almost 4 times greater than what women do. And I like to contribute that to that man box, because it teaches us that we don't ask for help, we don't offer help, and we don't accept help. All those things are hurting us. Not only our mental health, Ted, but also our physical health. So when we
Yes.
think about when I'm keeping things locked up, hey, which can lead to high blood pressure, which can lead to heart condition, which can lead to stroke. So many different other ways that it can impact our body that leads to stress. So what if we decide to start doing things as men to step outside of this box, begin to ask for help? I can think about my wife, other women in my life. They're dealing with things, they get together, have a conversation, help each other walk through it. But tell you and I could be dealing, I could be dealing with something that you've dealt with before, but I never would talk to you about it because I'm afraid that you're gonna look at me as being weak. And
Right.
all of a sudden and what we have to realize is teach men that at a very early age is that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of strength. It goes back to what you were saying about the car. Hey, if you see your gauge come on, the sign of strength is, hey, I'm gonna find a station where I can find some air, put air in my tire. And if it leaks down again, I'm going to find somewhere that I can get the tire repaired. So
Hmm.
what if we could take that same solution as men and begin to move in that same vein in our own personal lives? So this man box, we know it's hurting and killing women and girls who are
Hmm.
being trafficked, who are being abused, but it's also hurting and killing us as men.
Thank you, Rickie. And yeah, okay, yeah, let's stay here for a minute, but I do want to talk about the man box and the glue that keeps that man box together, what keeps it reinforced. But before I do that, you said a number of things, because I think about the issue of that physical health. You talked about high blood pressure, for example, right? So there's things that are very that suicide is about 4 times higher, as you mentioned, for men than women, right? Death by suicide. Now, and this is for the first time now, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about this later on, just about what's going on with our boys. This is the first time in our country That's death by suicide for young men is higher than death by suicide for middle-aged men. So what are we passing down? What are we passing down to our boys and to our young men? And being vulnerable, it's so hard for us as men to be vulnerable, though when we see vulnerability in other men, if I ask, we do a lot of work with professional sports leagues, right? I was with a team, I think it was the Chicago Bears in August, and I asked them, what do you hear around mental health, for example? Are there any influencers or people you respect that have spoken out around mental health? So a couple people mentioned Michael Phelps, right? Because he does stuff around mental health and depression. This is the greatest winner of Olympics, 22 gold medals, never only gold, 22 of them, right? And so I asked them, well, when he shares about his depression as a man, do you see that as weak or strength? His vulnerability, do you see that as a weakness or a strength? No, I respect him. That's strength. And I said, but we can't, but though we see it in other people and respect it in other people, we're afraid to show it. We're still afraid to show it. We're still afraid to be vulnerable, even though we know that it's can be received as respect, with respect, I should say. And then the other thing was, I think that was it. Around the medical issues. I see there's women on the call here. It looks like based on their names, I'm assuming there's quite a few women on the call. Think about the man in your life. If there's a man in your life who has a doctor's appointment, are you going with him to that appointment, or are you trusting that he's going to go to that appointment and ask all the right questions, or do you feel like you need to be there to ask the questions? Well, of course you need to be there to ask the questions because he's not going to do it. Because he'll go in there for whatever that ache and pain was, but he's not going to tell the doctor about his back's been bothering him for 10 years, or he's not gonna share how serious it is. He's gonna say, I'm okay, I'll be all right, because that's our socialization too, is to be tough and to move through it, pull your boots up by your pull your boots on by the bootstraps, all of those things, right? Being stoic, all of those things. And these things have their place in certain situations, but not in every aspect of our life. Certainly not when we go into the doctor to be checked out, right? We don't need to hide these things. We don't need to protect ourselves in that way. Okay, so those are things I wanted to say with that. Oh, the glue. So you know what? What's the next slide, Ricky? Because I really want to tie the glue to the issue of objectification. So let's finish talking about this, and then when we get to that slide with the equation, I'll speak to that.
Okay, sound good. But Ted, one of the big things that, and just, for our audience, we're talking about really that collective socialization of manhood. And we're really talking about, how these beliefs, and what we're trying to get you to see, that these beliefs begin to happen at a very early age. And I think when we're sharing the stat slide at the beginning, when we talked about 80 million men not never purchasing sex, about 80% of men, but 20% that do. And so when we think about it, that's when we think about 20% who do, what are the other 80% of men doing? And really, one of the things that we talk about here at the Call to Men is that other 80%, they have what we call a lack of interest. All
Mhm.
right. They have a lack of interest. That's why either you know it's happening, you're not doing anything, or you don't know it's happening. And that's sad when we see the news and all the numbers when we think about human trafficking. And I think it's like number two behind drug trafficking. I think it used to be three behind gun buying, but now it has moved up. And so when I think about lack of interest, oftentimes, Ted, how I normally explain this, especially as you said, we work with a lot of professional athletes and so also college athletes. And if I'm with a college football team, got 100 men in the room, I'll explain that lack of interest like this. I'll ask them, I'll say, um, I'll ask about 12, 15 guys to come to the front of the room with me. And I say, hey, let's play tug of war. All right. And I asked that 12, 15 guys, if we got 80 guys looking back at us, say, can we beat them? And of course, my 12, 15 guys look at me like, hey, you bumped your head on the way in here. But I got a few tough guys say, hey, we got it. But then I'll ask the larger group, 80, 85 guys, can we beat you in tug of war? And they're like, no. I was like, is there any way? They're like, no. I'm like, why? They said, numbers, man. They said the numbers don't add up. And I'll say, so you're saying because there's strength in numbers that you can beat us? And they were like, yes. I said, so let's go back and take this to men's violence against women as we think about domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. As we think about all those things, say 2 to 3 homicides per day happen in this country. Say one one out of four relationships going to be impacted by domestic violence. I said, that's my team up here wreaking all that havoc. When we look at these numbers for human trafficking, the average age of a girl being trafficked, age 14, that's my team wreaking all that havoc. Girls between the ages 16 and 24, 1 in 5 will experience sexual assault. I say, that's my team. So when we look at that, my small team up here is winning. I said,
Hmm.
but now for us to do what we've always done, continue to do this, we'll need for you to keep doing what you've always done. And I'll ask them, I say, and what's that? And that's when they begin to shake their head and say, nothing. And the reason they're doing nothing, they're not doing anything, is that because they develop what we call a lack of interest. But now you
Hmm.
said something very key early. If it's their sister or woman close to them, of course they have interest in their lives. But how do we move beyond the women that are close to us and we begin to see all women? How do we grab men's heart to get them to develop an interest in all women and girls? And so that's the work of here to call to men. So in order to shape that belief system that's going to, eventually shape behavior, we've got to develop what we call an interest in the experience of the women and girls.
That's right. That's right. And that lack of interest you're talking about, also this man box creates a situation for men where we can't be our full authentic self. So these rigid notions of manhood box us in, as we've been establishing. They box us in. So there's so many things outside of that box that we may find interesting that we don't do because it's seen as something that men don't do, right? And I know that there's any man in my life has had some experience similarly to that they haven't done something either as a boy or as an adult that interests them, but they were worried about how it would be perceived around their manhood or their masculinity. For example, I'll, at a call to men, Rickie, as you know, and people understand it now, I'm sure, we like to tell some stories because that's the way we connect men to their hearts. We don't lecture men. We want to go one of the longest distances is from your heart to your mind. And how do we shorten that distance? By storytelling, hoping that that resonates with men. So here's my story around authenticity. So for about the first year or so of my marriage, I would bring flowers home to my wife. Maybe every week, every 2 weeks, whenever they died, I'd replenish them. I'd go to the florist and get another bouquet, and usually in a vase, and bring it home and present it to her. And she appreciated it. And her friends would be over, and they'd say, "Oh, he's bringing you flowers still a year later or whatever." And she'd be like, "Yeah." And then it occurred to me about a year in, maybe a year and a half in, that if I didn't bring flowers home, she really wasn't asking about the flowers. She also, if I didn't bring them home, she didn't think that I didn't love her because there weren't flowers there. She really wasn't paying that much attention to the flowers. She appreciated them, but it wasn't something that got her attention in any real way. So when flowers weren't in the house, Rickie, she didn't make a big deal of it. She didn't really care. She didn't seem to miss them. But when the flowers weren't in the house, do you know who missed the flowers, Rickie? I did. I miss the flowers. I miss the way they smell. I miss the colors. They give me a sense of peace when I see them in the room. I get a sense of peace. I feel grounded. So it took me a year and a half to recognize that I was bringing flowers under the disguise of for my wife because I'm not supposed to be liking flowers, and I'm doing this work, Rickie. I've been doing this work too, right? So I'm supposed to have even more awareness. And that man box had me, man. That man box had me. And once I realized, like, wait a minute, I like the flowers, and it's good that I like the flowers. So now, when I go to the flowers, or since that time, when I go to the florist, they see me coming. They start bringing out all kinds of stuff. They know what I'm gonna, that I want to choose and mix and match my own. And they don't put them in a vase because they know to give it to me in a bouquet. Why? Because I want to go home and arrange them because I like flowers. So there's something in every man's life, as a boy or a man, who has not leaned into that part of themselves because they were concerned about being judged or being outside of that man box because and haven't done it. So there's so much that we miss from these rigid notions of manhood. We miss a lot of our humanity. We miss. Women get to express more freely right? I have a kid who identifies as queer, Jalen, who's 23 years old now, taught me more about authenticity than anyone else, and he has a freedom about him, Ricky, that I've never experienced, and but a real love for self that I've never experienced. So that authenticity is an important piece.
Thank you, Ted. And so, really, when we look at authenticity, lack of interest, the whole man box really, we call it the man box, but in the academic sense, we call it that collective socialization of manhood. But now there are three things that this man box teaches us that equals violence against women. Um, and really it shapes our belief system, Ted. And so
Hmm.
when we think about less value, that we're taught at a very early age to treat women as less value. And it takes me back to the story that you were sharing about the kid playing, throwing a football or whatever. When we tell him as a kid, hey, throwing like a girl. What does it teach about the value of girls? So when we think about that, so what's your story around that, Ted? When we think about less value, property and
Well,
objectification.
let's value that example of the girls, throwing like a girl, how we teach less value all the time, right? Well, shoot, I'll give you another story about less value in my own life. Again, doing this work, Ricky, doing this work about 10 years, and my oldest son, Joshua, I don't know if there's any dads on the call, but women who are on the call who have a man in their life who's a father, that man would understand what I'm saying. Where I'm going out of town now, and I'm kissing everybody goodbye, getting ready to get on a plane, right? And my oldest son, he was about 10 at the time that I recognized what was happening. He's about 10. He's the last one to walk me to the car. He's pulling my laptop bag behind me. It's a father and son moment. As I'm planning to go away for this trip, I'm thinking about, I get to say goodbye to Joshua. That's his name, Joshua. And he gets to say goodbye to me. And we just love this time because it's a bonding moment between father and son that I'm getting ready to leave. And like most good dads, when they're getting ready to leave town, they'll lean down to that oldest boy and no matter what his age, lean down to him and say, I'm going to ask people in their mind to answer this. So you can answer it in the chat, folks. If I'm leaning down to my son, or a father's leaning down to his son, he's getting ready to go out of town. The son's 10 years old. He leans down and say, "Okay, son, now you," and I'm going to ask people to finish that sentence for me. You're the man of the house. Take care of the
Yeah,
woman.
it's in the chat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. See, this is our socialization. This is a good
Mhm.
example of socialization. We've never talked about this with Pam and Elizabeth, but they know the answer. So so I'm leaning down, saying the same thing to him, right? Take care of things around here. You're the man of the house now. Mind you, he's 10 years old. He can't take care of anything, right? But maybe his little brother, while maybe he could take care of his little brother while they're in the same room. But mama ain't gonna leave him to take care of his little brother. She's not gonna leave the house. He can't take care of anything, right? But so let me first say this is not an indictment on fatherhood. I'm a good father, and fathers who do that are not bad fathers. They're good fathers. We're actually trying to teach our son something important. We're teaching him to be responsible. We're teaching him to be accountable. We're teaching him to be a leader, right? But there's other ways to teach him that don't happen at the expense of his mother. Because I'm motivating him at the expense of his mother in the same way we motivated that boy to try harder at the expense of girls. That's our socialization. So that's where that less value is happening all the time. And not only that, in that moment, Ricky and audience members, in that moment, not only am I teaching him those things at the expense of his mother, I'm actually passing down my male privilege to him in that moment. Because what I'm saying is, hey, son, take care of things around here. This is ours. When I leave, you got to take care of it, and I'll take it back when I get here, right? Because we're doing it at the expense of his mother. Because when we say take care of things around here, we're assuming, or he's getting the message that she needs his help, right? Be the man of the house. She must need one. And I've done this exercise with men, Ricky, and I've asked men who's married here? And the man will raise his hand, and I'll go over to John, ask him his name. His name's John. I'll say, "What's your wife's name?" He'll say, "It's Kathy." I say, "John, do you go out of town for anything?" "Yes." "When you're out of town, does Kathy got it? Does she have everything under control?" "Yes." And I say, "I bet, John, when you're in town, Kathy got everything in control and make sure you are doing what you're supposed to do. Isn't that right?" He's like, "Yep." So it isn't that women are not capable. It's but right, but we act like they're not. They're actually extremely capable, but we act like they're not. So that's where less value is woven into the fabric of any patriarchy, honestly, any male dominant society. You're going to see that. And then the issue of property, I want to ask our viewers here. You're in North Carolina, I'm in New York, wherever you might be or grow up or grown up, think about it. In 2025, if all that we know about domestic violence, we have a Domestic Violence Awareness Month just ended. All that we know about domestic violence, if I'm in your community and I see a man hitting his wife or girlfriend and I walk over to him and say, "Knock it off," what does he say to me? People can put that in the chat too, please. What does he say to me if I say "knock it off" to him? I'm going to give folks a minute because I want to see if they understand what I understand. Mind your business. There we go. That's our socialization. Thank you, Natalie. So we've never talked about this, Natalie, but you know the answer. Mind your business. So what does that say? That says that men understand that it's a silent thing. We're not supposed to be interfering with any man in his relationship with his with the woman in his life, right? With his woman. I was going to say with his woman. So
Yeah, you know what? I was
yes.
at a high school, man, working with some high school boys, and I asked them. I said, "Look, everybody, close your eyes." They were probably sophomores and juniors, and I said, "You walking down the hall." I said, all of a sudden, it's after lunch, you go into your class, and you hear like a commotion over near the lockers, and you look over there, and it is a boy who has his girlfriend, has this girl pinned up by his forearm against the locker. It was 30 guys in the group. I said, "How many of you would get involved?"
Mm,
Only 3 hands went up. So I
mhm.
didn't ask the three, but I asked the other 27. I said, "Why wouldn't you get involved?" And the answer was, "Hey, that's his girl. They're working things out." So when I hear that, Ted, what it's saying is that's his property.
Yep.
That's his
That's
property,
right.
what they were saying. I asked him, I said, "Look, close your eyes again." I said, "Same scenario." I said, "But this time," I said, the young woman in the scenario, that's your sister, and you're not there. How many of you would want someone to get involved?
Hmm.
All hands go
All of
up.
them.
But in the
Yep.
first scenario, that's a whole property thing, man.
Hmm.
So these belief systems that's been passed down to boys at a very early age.
Yes, Ricky, that's a good example. And I'll even add to that, Ricky. Let's say that you're at the mall and you notice you notice a woman walking, and then a man approaches her and starts being violent, and she doesn't know him. How many men would get involved? I bet all of them. I bet all of them.
Mhm.
So that's a great example. That's a really good example. And that's what we're taught to do is mind our business. And I'm not, at least the last time I checked the statistics in the United States, as far as women who are killed, and it's not just women who are victims, there's same gender violence, but we're talking about the majority of the victims are women and the majority of violence is men's violence, right? So that's what I want to lean into here. Um, so, uh, um, but with that, um, oh, that last time I checked the statistic, every day in the United States, about 3 women are killed in the United States, and 75% of those women are killed once she decides to leave or has left. And we want her to be safe, but oftentimes when she tries to leave or does leave, that increases the risk of her in being in more danger. So 3 out of 4 of those murders occur um, once she decides to leave or has left, which says something about the belief system of those men who perpetrate that violence. That if I can't have her, nobody can have her. That's property too, to your point. So we talked about less value. We talked about property. Let me talk about objectification because that's where the demand piece comes in also. So less value we've established, property we've established. I want to talk about objectification. So again, I want folks to think about a young man in their family, let's say he's 16 or 17, in their community, at their high school, good kid, like salt of the earth, good kid, not somebody who's going to harm anyone. And his friends are not people who are going to harm anyone. But let's say his name is John, and he meets a young woman, or he goes to school with a young woman who he just thinks is really cool. She's dope. He wants to hang out with her, and they decide to go out and just, they're gonna check out a movie together, right? He gets on a group text with a couple of his friends and says, "Hey guys, I'm going to the movie with Kathy. I'll hit you guys up later," right? They give him a little crap for that because they're 16, 17, and that's what they do. So he goes to the movie. After the movie, he goes home, Kathy goes home, and he gets back on his group text and says, "Hey guys, I'm back from the movie. I'm going to ask you all who are watching, is the first thing those boys, good boys now, is the first thing they ask him is, how was the movie?" No. You can put that in the chat too. Right. They don't, Lorraine, you're absolutely right. Melissa, they don't ask him that. They're going to ask him, what'd you get? Did you hit it? Did she put out? Did you this? Did you that? So forth and so on. So where did they get that from? They're 16 or 17 years old. They know that it's supposed to be about the conquest. If you're not spending time with her, so if if he says, "I wasn't trying to get anything, I just like hanging out with her like I like hanging out with you guys," he's gonna say those friends are gonna say things about that too, right? And you can put in the chat what you think they might say about that too. They're going to question his sexuality. They're going to ask him, "Don't you like girls?" They're going to do all these things that say, "You're missing the point. It's about the conquest, John. Why aren't you trying to conquer this woman and her body?" Are you? Yes, they're going to question his sexuality, his preference, his orientation, rather. So that's where the glue that keeps that man box together is homophobia. You have to have it.
Yeah. So Ted, when you talk about all of this less value, the property objectification, when we think about violence against women, this is the thing that drives demand. Because everything that we talked about so far, it really, really lays the foundation about men's violence against women. When we think about human trafficking, because when I think about it, Ted, whether we're talking about sex trafficking or either labor trafficking, is that we don't see the humanity in somebody. So their value, we don't see their humanity. And then humanity again, when we think about them as property. And also the sexual objectification. That's why when we look at this is why that all of those things equal to demand. And that's why it's so prevalent. One of the things too, Ted, is that when we look at this, when we think about this, and we look at this pyramid here, when you talk about that whole collective socialization of manhood, when I look at this pyramid, I want you to take a look at this now. There's, on this pyramid, the only thing it's in no order. The only thing that's in its right order is the foundation, that collective socialization of manhood. When we think about that less value, treating women with less value, treating women as the property of men, sexually objectifying women, all those things, that collective socialization. If we crumble that foundation, then we can eradicate all those things. One of the things, Ted, I think though, at a very early age, when we talk about that beliefs, where it comes from, when we think about porn, y'all can put in the chat, at about what age do you think about, boys begin to watch porn and how that began to shape their belief system? And one of the things is they're introduced at a very early age. I think the average age is around 10, 11 years old, where boys begin to watch porn. And if no one have a conversation with him around porn, and he continues to watch it, the porn that he's watching at 10 or 11. But let me say this, Ted, that means average age 10 or 11, they mean they could start watching as early as 5 or 6.
Right.
And now it's so easy, because think about at what age we begin to give kids cell phones. So they have the internet available to them. But now if he begins to watch it, say 10 or 11 years old, the porn he's watching at 15 or 16 is not the same porn that he's started watching at 10 or 11, because we know it has that stimulating factor.
Right.
And so now he's beginning to watch images that are very violent. Okay. But not only that, but now other friends of his, when we think about this whole man box, if they're watching it, go back to the story about the boys you talked about, and he's not watching it, then what's wrong with you? That glue you said that holding man box together, heterosexism that glue the whole man box together. So what is wrong with you? And so we're sending a message to them at a very early age that, hey, these are the things that you're supposed to do. So if you don't do this, there's something is wrong with you. And so, but when we think about this too, and he's watching porn that's violent, that's denigrating towards women, that's dehumanizing toward women, then he can become very misogynistic, which is the hatred toward women. So all of this is shaping his belief system. All of these things is shaping his belief system. And if he believes these things, the things that you believe are going to eventually shape your behavior. So when we think about demand, all of these things are really driving demand. Anything you want to add to that, Ted?
Man, you've said a lot. So no, I know we got to get to Q&A soon, so I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to just speak about the trafficking piece because you mentioned human trafficking and labor trafficking, and it's all trafficking, and oftentimes labor trafficking winds up being sexual trafficking as well, right? I'm sorry, human trafficking being sexual trafficking and labor trafficking. Often trafficking winds up being also sex trafficking because the manipulation and the controls that are put on that person for their labor, like their room and board, for instance, right? And then they become in debt for whoever the trafficker is, and now they have to pay off that debt. And what do you have to pay off the debt with other than your body, right? So it's just a tragic situation. And I do want to just say those things that less value, property, and objectification we unpacked all of those, but with pornography and with purchasing bodies of people, those three things happen at the same time in the same moment. That the person's being objectified, the person seen as property, and this person seen as having less value, all at the same time. That's where they meet at once in this situation, which is not common everywhere else. Those things often happen separately.
Wow, thanks for unpacking that, Ted. Also, Ted, too, when we think about behavior, we think about the media impact on demand, and this was a beer commercial years ago.
Yeah.
Here's to the twins. When we think about the objectification again, that we just saying. So, I'm sitting down watching TV with my little nephew, and this commercial come on. How do I have that conversation? Is this about football? Is this about them being twin sisters, or this sexual objectification when we talk about their breasts? What twins are being talked about. So all of these things, when we think about media, are driving behavior for little boys, shaping their belief system at a very early age.
So this was
Ted, I went back.
this was a commercial. This was an ad that came up during a football game, correct?
Correct.
That's why you're talking about football. Okay.
Yeah. And Ted, and actually, I have another picture with this same one with the goalpost. He was going for 1 or 2. And when we think about extra point is 1, but a field goal is 3 points. So
Yeah.
we know we're not talking about football. So we
Right.
think about even sexual objectification in all our commercials now.
Right.
I was
And
sharing with
that,
I was speaking at a human trafficking event last week, and I talked about, man, I love those crackers, those little Cheez-Its. And now they've kind of sexualized one of the Cheez-Its commercials. So you think
mm,
about objectification even in that. So looking
mm.
at the media, how it's driving behaviors as well.
And
You're going to say something, Ted?
yeah, just that I'm glad you brought this up because I know this is from an ad from a few years, well, from a number of years ago, but the sexual objectification is within our culture. I just really want to emphasize that this is not just in 2025. It's not this generation of kids who are the problem. It's just this next generation. It's the next evolve. It's evolved in this generation, just like it evolved in my generation, and so forth. James Bond with Sean Connery, who I loved, he was the only James Bond. But But you talk about objectifying women all the time. It was always about that. So it's not like we'll often blame current cultural expressions through music or what have you, and blame them, but it's they're just putting their spin on what's already been in existence, just like you have here.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ted. That's why I found this old throwback picture that we used to use some years ago. I say, wow, it's very relevant for this conversation because we go back to previous generations when you think about Hugh Hefner there. And so this has been happening for years. It's just now this younger generation, especially with our music, we're seeing the objectification of women, in music as well. When we think about misogyny in media, music, and culture, how it's impacting this new generation.
So let's let people take this in real quick. This is a hip hop artist named Future. The song is My Collection. Won't get a response from me. Ain't no confessions. Before I tell a lie, won't tell you nothing. Anytime I got you, girl, you're my possession. Even if I hit you once, you're a part of my collection. Only objectification. Disposable. She's disposable. She's an object. She belongs to him. Less value, property objectification. You
Ted,
got another one there?
and
Yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna do another one real quick, but let me ask you a question there. Even if I hit you once, is he talking about physically hitting her with his fist?
I think he's talking about having sex with her once, meaning he hit it.
It exactly. And so just wanted people to understand, the context of this.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
it's in all genres of music. When we think about Luke Bryan here, the country girl, shake it for me. Country girl, shake it for me, girl. Shake it for me, girl. Shake it for me. Country girl, shake it for me, girl. Shake it for me, girl. Shake it for me.
Mm,
And so when we think about it, is what is he talking about her shaking?
right.
And so we think about, it's her, it's her body. So sexual objectification all over again. And so so many other artists here, the Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, Rick Ross. Ted, we could have had about 100 slides when we think about different genres of music, when we think about sexual objectification through music and media.
Yes.
One of the things too, Ted, just wanted to kind of touch on for a minute is that when we think about digital media, we think about this generation now, um, the manosphere, and the media impact that it's having. People on digital media, watching social media, YouTube, and all those things. The lessons that the manosphere is really teaching them.
Hmm.
And YouTube is saying, what's the number one thing boys and young men are searching for on YouTube?
Oh, we should
And
let people answer that. We should let people give
yeah,
us a moment to answer that. Can you just repeat that question for them, Ricky?
yeah, yeah. What's the number one thing boys and young men are searching on YouTube
The
when we
number
think
one
about
thing.
digital media?
Right. So a phrase or a topic, right? If
Mm-hmm.
folks can put that in the chat, just whatever you think, just so we can get maybe two people to respond, just so we can move on here. Porn, sex. Okay. Those are those
Mm-hmm.
are those are those are good guesses. How to get a girl. Teen girls.
Teen girls. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And the big thing is about masculinity. It's about manhood. How to be a man. And so they're getting on this manosphere, they getting some really, really unhealthy answers around manhood. And I'm gonna define the manosphere here shortly. But I
So
just
so
want
so Ricky, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure people caught that. So it's not these are really good guesses, but it's not those things. You would think it is, but the number one question is how to be a man or what is a man, something related to that. And then this manosphere, these messages around manhood go right to that algorithm once you ask that, once these boys ask that, right? And that's what you're referring to. So it's so as much as these make sense that are in the chat, it's actually about how to be a man.
Mhm. Yeah. And so when we think about the number of boys who, 5 to 6 billion boys online, and we think about 23 minutes about how long it takes for manosphere content to come up. And so when we think about 93% of teenage boys are visiting those YouTube or social media platforms, 28 to 35 hours of what they're spending on YouTube and TikTok. So when we think about how belief shape behavior, if they're spending that much time online and the negative stuff that you talk about, Ted, when we think about the manosphere, Ted, you mind reading that definition, about the manosphere, what they're
Sure,
getting?
sure. And that 25 to 28 to 35 hours is per week, right? So that's a
Mm-hmm.
full-time job. It's a full-time
Mm-hmm.
job. It's a
Mm-hmm.
full-time job. All right. So yeah, so the manosphere, for those who don't know, it is a relatively new term, but it's been in existence for quite a while, and it's a collection of communities that are online, primarily digitally facilitating in online spaces that promote male dominance, misogyny, and harmful notions of gender roles and expression. So, oftentimes, so if that boy is saying what it is to be a man, all these messages come to him that are really based in men being dominant, misogynistic, harmful notions of gender roles and expression. Women are here to serve you, right? This is the message that comes. Women are here to serve you. If you don't have economic opportunity or romantic opportunity, it's the fault of women. They're taking the jobs. They're the ones who aren't finding you attractive. So you should hate women. And by the way, this is again the manosphere messaging, not mine. And it's also, by the way, women should be home having kids anyway. That's what their purpose and role is. So that's the messages of the manosphere. And then it does get into all those other things, like how to get a hot girl. The manosphere says you have to lift weights, you have to make money. There's all kinds of things around cosmetic things you do to your jawline. They're like, it's all these things that are coming at these boys. And the voices are strong and they're aggressive and they're very charismatic. So these guys have a lot of followers. So we need our boys to ask to go into other areas to get the algorithm to shift where they get more positive messages around manhood and masculinity.
So Ted, we can't land the plane without talking about what's the antidote to the manosphere. And
It's
so
a
when we talk about the Live Respect curriculum that we talked about earlier.
Yes, and people can grab this QR code, and I'm going to also put information in the chat about our website. You can get information there too. But the Live Respect curriculum, if you're in schools, you want this. If you have after-school programs, sports programs, anything with middle school, high school boys, please look at the Live Respect curriculum.
Ted, also now here's a book that you're the co-author of.
Yes, the Book of Dares. This is 100 ways for boys to be kind, bold, and brave. It's 100 positive challenges. If you can see that little boy jumping, wait, if you can see a little boy jumping from his the Book of Dares, 100 positive challenges around. They're all positive challenges around authenticity, healthy masculinity, and gender fairness. And you can
All
get
right.
that on Amazon, and it'll probably be to you in the next hour if you go to Amazon.
But Ted, as we wrap up, there's some work we did here in North Carolina with
Yes.
the Human Traffic Commission. We did a PSA and also had a website, what are you searching for? And so I just want to wrap up our time together before we turn over to Pam for question and answer, just to share this one video with them.
First time I purchased sex was after a fight with my partner. I went online initially searching for connection and intimacy. Afterwards, I felt better for a bit, but then came the guilt, the emptiness, the lies. I started purchasing sex after
Yeah, it wasn't playing for some reason. The picture of the guy didn't come up. There you go.
First time I purchased sex was after a fight with my partner. I went online initially searching for connection and intimacy. Afterwards, I felt better for a bit, but then came the guilt, the emptiness, the lies. I started purchasing sex after disappointments at work or when I was feeling isolated and alone. I wanted to feel powerful and in control. I was stuck in a cycle of pain and shame.
From the time we are toddlers, boys are taught that they have to be tough, fearless, in control, strong, without emotion, powerful, and winners. When they fall short, society tells them to man up, that boys don't cry, that they're acting like a girl. Men are socialized to reject their feelings. We are taught to erase our hurt, disappointment, fear, pain, and rejection with power, control, alcohol, drugs, work, and sex. These types of teachings stem from a rigid view of manhood that prevent us from being our full, authentic selves and reinforces misguided notions of male dominance and superiority. We call that the man box. These standards are almost impossible to live up to. At the same time, media and culture bombard us with messages saying women are sexual objects, the property of men, that they have less value than men, and we can do with them as we please. This is what all men are taught from a young age, not just those who purchase the bodies of women and girls, but all of us. Purchasing a person doesn't buy what you really need. Healthy manhood is what you're searching for. Healthy manhood is freedom for you, for those who are trafficked and sold for sex, and we are inviting you to join millions of men committed to healthy manhood. Men who embrace their emotions, men who ask for support when they need it, men who value women and girls, men who want meaningful relationships, men just like you.
I can see now how I was taught to view manhood was not right. When I was feeling inadequate, I compensated by dominating someone else. Now when I have those feelings, I can make different choices. I can stop and focus on what it is I'm really searching for and prevent harming or taking advantage of someone else. And I can become the man that I'm truly meant to be.
All right, I want to invite Pam back into the space, and we have the video also in Spanish as well, and that was the other video, and Pam will have access to that.
Wow. Thank y'all so much. That was awesome, as always. One of the things that my first question is, I shared with you that one of the goals of this webinar series is to get people involved and to show them that they can do things in their own community. So is this video, this PSA, something that we can make available to our participants so that they can show it and hopefully even get their local TV stations maybe to show it?
Yes, I'll share that with you. Share both of them with you, Pam, because we have the one that Ted did in English, and then Chucho, who's our Healthy Manhood Initiatives coordinator. He did another one in Spanish as well, and so that we can reach both communities.
Awesome. Awesome. I said I wasn't going to look at chat for questions, but I do really like something that Lorraine has to say here. Is this a way of saying that men are groomed from a young age?
Well, groomed isn't the word we'd use, but it fits. But our word would be socialized. So that they're socialized, that boys are socialized from a young age and become the men that that socialization creates. So groomed, I don't know if it's grooming seems more intentional. Like to me, my understanding of grooming more intentional, but it is that too. So yes, it's but we would use the term socialization, socialized,
Yeah,
taught,
and one of the things,
socialized.
and Ted, something you said earlier about, these fathers are well intentioned. I was sharing with my wife today. I was laughing. I said, not my wife. I was one of our social media persons on staff. We're talking about some information for another video for social media, and I was sharing with her. I said, my son, who's getting ready to turn 30, I said he gets his haircut every other week. I said, where do you think he learned that? And she said, from you. And I said, where do you think I learned it from? She said, your dad. So when you're thinking about it, that's something that's being passed on. Now, I grew up in a family of six. I'm the youngest of six, three boys and three girls. And those gender roles were present. My dad, he wasn't doing anything intentionally harmful, but those were the things that he was passed down. So our work at a call to men is that as Ted said earlier, is that, hey, I love being a man, but we have to look at what are those things that are hurtful toward women? What are those things that doesn't allow for equity toward women that's doing, that's hurting women and girls? And so how do we reimagine, like we like to say at a call to men, how do we reimagine manhood? And so that's our work there. And so when we look at it is that sometimes then when we teach that dad something different, then he put those things in place. But until then, he's just doing, he's on remote control. He's just doing what's been passed down.
Exactly. Exactly. I am not seeing a lot of questions in the Q&A, y'all. These are two, nationally and internationally recognized experts on this topic, so we need to take advantage of them. Come on.
I got one in the chat here. Says, Ted and Rickie, how have you pursued getting respect curriculum into public schools to the Boys and Girls Club? And then Ted, there's another question for you. So I answer the top part while you answer the bottom one. But it's been a challenge getting into schools around the country. Some have been through the side door, but then we had our Healthy Masculinity project that just ended. It was a 3-year project where we launched it in 20 programs year one, an additional 32 the second year, and an additional 40 last year. So a total of 92 programs, minimum of 25 kids. But now we have a lot of others who downloaded from our website, and so for some schools had to get MOUs changed in order to get it in. Some communities, because it has that word, when we think about consent, think about sex, that has been a challenge as well. But how do you find that champion at school? How do you have that conversation with the principal who sees that, hey, this is a risk factor for all of our kids in order to bring it in? But it would be great if we could work with school boards. And we did work with one in Arizona where we're able to get it in the whole school system out in Tucson, Arizona.
And you might, and Rickie, I know and Rich, thank you for that. Congratulations on 53 years. You've done very well. Thanks for sharing that. But even if it's not in the school system, because it does, the public schools in particular have, they're limited for time. They have structural issues. It takes forever to get agreement, but you can do things within the school. There might be an after-school program. There might be a coach who wants to do it, take 1 week, 1 hour out of their practice every week to focus on healthy masculinity. We do a lot of work with coaches. We have coaching events and online events for coaches also. So you can also see what else is available to those kids, even in extracurricular activities that you might be able to do a pilot. And then you can show that school, we work with the basketball team, 15 kids once a week, and it's made a big difference. They're real leaders now in the school.
Yeah, and I'm seeing another question here from Melissa, who's in a rural community. And I love the Safe Dates program, Melissa. I used to do that myself, who didn't have access to the school, to the students anymore. And that's a challenge. And it may be, one of the things sometimes when you're struggling, getting into a program, finding that champion on the inside, or finding that community champion, whether it's someone on the school board, whether it's a teacher. And sometimes what I've been able to do sometimes is that school social workers are always sometimes looking for a curriculum. So it's either partnering with the school social worker or the school counselor, and sometimes they can maybe get you access to get in. But it would be great if you could go through the front door and do it. But sometimes it's maybe working with somebody, in the school already.
And I'm gonna put a video of one of the schools in the chat for everybody to grab, because you can share this video. It's on Live Respect, and you can share this video with if you want to pass it on as a selling point. I'm gonna pull it up right now. I'll put it in the chat. Give me 1 second.
So, Rickie, is my understanding correct that Live Respect is primarily for boys and young men, right? So maybe that's why it might be hard to get into a school system, because
I'm supposed to be like strong, fit. They have to I don't know,
That's Ted. Ted, you got your mic. Yeah, we're hearing your video, man.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, when it was designed, it's a curriculum designed for boys and
Right.
young men. But we've have had Chucha, I think about him who's done it in, within co-ed groups. So when we think about the rules, as Ted talked about the man box rules, we've taught women how to treat us in that man box. And so sometimes you hear girls tell a boy, hey, you're acting like a girl. And so so some of those lessons, that's in the Live Respect curriculum, it could be, also taught, in a mixed gender setting as well.
Similar to this conversation, right? The women in the chat were very much engaged. It resonates with them too. So we just have to speak into it for all genders, or for women as well.
Yeah, y'all know that I'm in this space a lot, and so I'm at a lot of conferences and a lot of webinars, and sadly the audience is almost always mostly women. Do y'all have any advice on how to get more men in these spaces?
Well, that's what we do, and I would say expose them to us as much as possible. Do things like this, right? You're Pam, you're exposing us to a whole new group of folks. And there's also, we put the social media in there and the website. You can share that information with men in your life too, and say, hey, ran into this really cool organization. You might be interested. That's all. Not anything big for us. Not sit down and watch this. You know what I mean? So. But that's the experience. We've been around for 23 years. We founded the organization 23 years ago, and it's still more women in the audience in many cases than men, but it's gotten a lot better. But it's still women who bring us to the community more so than men do. But it has gotten a lot better. So just feel free to keep spreading the word about us.
So here's a question. What topics would you suggest for young men to search to, on YouTube for healthy sites?
Mm-hmm. Respect, how to best respect women, value people, healthy relationships, a call to men, and because we have a lot of content, but we don't have 2 million followers like many of these manosphere guys do. So when you put something in, the manosphere responds because of the popularity of those voices, no matter what they're saying. So that's what I would say is respecting women, feminist men. Even though feminism is just around respect for women, that's what it is. But something like that, and you get different messaging in.
Yeah, and maybe even the phrase healthy masculinity.
Yep, healthy masculinity might do it too. Healthy and respectful masculinity in particular.
So here's another question from my colleague Nikki. What types of responses are you getting from college or high school male athletes when you speak to them? Are they resistant?
We get tremendous response from college athletes. Actually, I'll even go as far as saying those people, those young men and men who are in the hyper masculine spaces, athletics, military, they get it just like that because they have to live it in a whole different way, the man box. So when we give them permission and a space to talk about that, they're ready to go. And they have so much, there's so much sports in particular, so much camaraderie with each other in sports. There's a vulnerability that they have on the field and as they're doing things and that teamwork that you can really tap into and use that in the same way Rickie gave an example in some of the things he said earlier, but using that as a way of educating them around respect for women, girls, and all people.
And one of the big things too, Ted, is that Ted uses this phrase a lot. He coined it, and I love it. Say we don't indict men, but we invite them into a conversation. And so when we in those spaces, we engage those men as a solution. We engage those athletes as a solution. When we talk about culture, how do we change culture? People change culture. And so I tell athletes all the time is that people look up to you on this campus. You have influence. So now that you have influence, develop that platform, to talk about healthy masculinity. You can change that culture on this college campus. You can change this culture on this high school campus. And so we look at them as leaders, and we've been in spaces where coaches were afraid for us to come in, but the way we engaged the boys, that we didn't beat up on them, but we gave them solutions. We and looked at them as the solution to the problem.
Right.
And sometimes I've had coaches say, "Hey, look, I've got my athletes who want to start a club here. How can you support us?" And so once they hear this message, and oftentimes we speak to them in a language that they can understand, maybe using that sport and analogy within that sport, so that they can really see and so and not saying no, you're wrong about this, but sometimes it's asking the right questions. So it's the type of engagement that we've had a lot of success around, in colleges, high school, and also professional sports.
Thank you, Rickie, and thank you, Ted. This has been just a wonderful time together. The time that y'all spoke with each other, and then the time that our participants engaged as well. And I'm just really grateful for y'all. I do want to take a minute and tell our participants about our next webinar. Y'all will bear with me while I share my screen here. All right. There we go. Whoops, one too many. Here we go. So next week is going to be really engaging too, because we're going to have a survivor leader who's going to share her lived experiences, shed light on how demand directly impacts victims of trafficking. And she's going to share her perspective on survivor-informed approaches to prevention. So we've got the QR code here. If you're not already registered for next week, please go ahead and and take the QR code. And then I'm going to show you next the final one. We're going to have folks here from Truckers Against Trafficking, which is just a really dynamic group doing work all across the country. And then we're going to have two folks from the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, which is the group that pretty much well, they did start the fair food movement here in the U.S. And just really brought to light the exploitation of labor in agriculture in Florida. So hope you can join us for that as well. I'll go back to this one since it's next week. We are grateful for y'all. Oh, I did want to mention, if you can't attend sessions 3 and 4, but you're interested, you can go ahead and register because we will send you the recording. So feel free to do that. Thank y'all again for being here. We appreciate you, and we will be sending you a follow-up email. Have a good night. Ted and Rickie, thank you. Y'all are amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. And Ted, thanks for joining me tonight. You were great.
You
And
too.
I do share y'all whenever I can. So
Thank you.
I'm plugging y'all.
Thank you. All right. So thank you, Pam. Hope everything goes well with this.
Thank you. Thank you both. Good night.
All right. Good
All right,
night.
take care.